thanks very much for your support of this process. We're just going to try something a little bit different now, and we'd certainly like to have your involvement. So we heard yesterday from Paul Raines from the UK Local Government Association about the campaign that they've launched in Britain called Rewiring Public Services. And you're all aware that local government in Britain has undergone massive cost cuts, and you saw those figures from Paul yesterday. So the funding for local government from the national government has been reduced by over 40% in the last 4 or 5 years. And despite that massive cuts, the sort of community satisfaction with council services has increased. And it's not, as Jeff Kennett said yesterday, it's not the end of the world, even though it might sort of come close to it. Not the end of the world. Some changes have been made. Life goes on. So in Victoria, Australia, councils are facing ever tightening fiscal environments. So we thought we'd just try an experiment, because we never really get to the brave stage of putting something on the table and saying, this is what local government wants to do. You know, within the broader picture, perhaps individual councils do it, but just as a sector, we don't get to the stage of putting something on the table and saying, this is how we'd like to see things arranged to help, produce better outcomes for communities, and really fight hard for it. And in Britain, with the Rewiring Public Services, the councils have put a proposal on the table. That's how we'd like to see things done in terms of improving services for communities. And that started a sort of massive debate across Britain, in the media, in Parliament. So there's no reason why that can't happen here. So to start the process, we thought we'd just go through an exercise with the quickest appointment of a Commission of Inquiry in Australian history. And these are the gentlemen who are currently, and the ladies.
You're very close, John.
These are the ladies and gentlemen currently before you. And I'm glad to see we have gender balance. So we thought if we go through a similar exercise and we have people discussing the current issues that we face as local government, and what could be done about it in terms of trying to present, or in terms of trying to achieve some improved outcomes in the future in terms of how the public sector is organised in Australia. We currently have funding that's not perhaps equitable. We currently have structural arrangements that perhaps aren't equitable. We currently have some service delivery mechanisms that perhaps aren't very satisfactory. So a lot of things that aren't sort of well planned and delivered as we speak, that were perhaps arranged 50, 100 years ago. So can we think of some ways to improve the status quo? And so we've got 4 presenters to be the expert witnesses to the 6 commissioners who will be introduced to you in a moment. We'll have 4 presenters as expert witnesses, and at the end of each presentation, the Commission can actually ask the presenters some questions if they wish to. And at the end of the 4 presentations, it'll be your turn, if you have any opinions about how what you think should be happening, to present to the Commission or to ask questions of the Commission. Okay, so we'll just have the introductions of the Commission now. Paul Raines has undertaken the role of Chair of the Commission, even though he's a non-Australian resident. We welcome him with completely open arms and with equality as an Australian resident to be the Chair of the Commission just for the next 6 hours. Then we'll have the 4 expert witnesses presenting some facts and figures to help to crystallise what might happen. Then the Commission can ask the presenters questions. At the end of the four presentations, we'll then cross over to yourselves to ask any questions or to put any opinions from your perspective as to how you think things should be structured for a better future for local government. So that's the process. I'll pass over now to Paul Raines, who has the microphone in front of him.
I just wanted to share a thought after having listened to the last sort of 24 hours or so in this room, which is all of you I completely recognise as being local government people in the way I would recognise the people I work with back in the UK as being local government people. And there are kind of there are two things about us that might be worth drawing out. One of which is that I've heard a group of people who are incredibly close to their communities and doing all kinds of incredibly innovative and real stuff to make people's lives better. But I've also heard people who have a slight tendency to see the glass as half empty rather than half full, and to underestimate the amount of leverage having a local democratic mandate and an amazing track record delivering services gives you. And actually that leverage goes up when things are getting more difficult on the public spending side and the environment is tougher. And so I hope that what we might see in the course of this conversation is, you know, an emerging sense of confidence and opportunity, and that, you know, the future is something that the people in this room really want to shape and believe that they can and will shape. That's just a kind of framing thing. I'm not going to bother actually introducing myself, but shall we, starting at that end, just go through who we are.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. This one? Is that on? Okay. Look, there's far too many words about me up there already. But what I wanted to stress in reintroducing myself is that it is my background as a local government practitioner. So I'm, whilst these days I'm best known as a general purpose bullshit artist on local government issues, I actually spent many years, running functions in councils, running a regional organisation of councils. I've sat at possibly not as many council meetings as some of you, but a hell of a lot. So what I'll be bringing to this today, every bit as much as my recent work on reviews and in academia, is that practitioner background.
I've said way too much this morning.
Donna, you said it very well though. My name's Tracy Slater and I'm the CEO of the City of Port Phillip. But I think what I bring to this panel is a bit of a diversity of experience. I've worked at an executive level in state government in Victoria. I've worked at a rural council. Now work at a metropolitan council, but in between that I've worked for a statutory authority that operated on commercial principles and delivered a dividend back to government every year. So I think that broader perspective is helpful to this conversation.
I'm Dave Barry, the Chief Executive Officer at Alpine Shire Council. Some of you heard me yammer on yesterday a little bit about, I guess, my commercial outlook on local government.
Dave, I'm sure there's much more that you can say about yourself. My name's Rebecca McKenzie. I'm the CEO at Mitchell Shire Council, which is the first council just outside of Melbourne going up the Hume towards Sydney. And sort of prior to this, I had a background in corporate services. HR is my professional area. But I also spent 5 years working for a council in the UK, and as part of that was leading a sort of public-private sector partnership as part of that work as well.
Thank you. So John, do you want to introduce our first expert witness?
Thanks very much. And just to say that the process will be, once we've heard from the witnesses and you've had your chance to have your questions or comment, we'll break for lunch. And then over lunch, the Commission will go into a closed room and come up with their... Sorry?
Lock them up.
You're supposed to say that afterwards.
typical local government. So they'll go into a closed room and consider their position over lunch, and then come back after lunch with their consensus as to what the preferred directions and any recommendations are. So once we get past lunch, you'll then hear about the what's come out of the process from the Commissioner's point of view, and again, you can then have questions and discuss any points with them once you've heard what they've got to say. So the first expert witness this morning is McAllum from Global Foresight, and quite a few councillors in the room would have worked with Mike. He's one of Australia's foremost futurologists, and has done a lot of work with local government. And he's going to put his perspective about the way things are and will be to you. So can you please welcome Mike McAllum.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to address you and the wider audience. Just before I start, I have in my hand, it's too small for you to all see, a small 3D printed object. It was printed by CSIRO in their fabrication lab here. It's made out of titanium, and it was downloaded from a design shop in California. and I would like this to be circulated down here and then around the audience. Please don't bounce it or break it, it is not mine. Simply to show you that I think that even fundamental ideas like manufacturing are going to profoundly change, not by 2030 or 2040, but in the next 5 to 7 years. And so if you like, this little thing that you're looking at here, I think is a symbol of the quantum of change that everybody in our society is facing. My remit really is to try and build, I think, a wider narrative. My concern right now is that we could try and go to the future with no story. And I'm going to argue that, in fact, the current story is broken. And it goes a bit like this, and I have a concern. My first concern is that the reality of local government is that there are at least 3, and there are probably a lot more systems, which are bundled up inside local government. And each of them has a different business model, different architecture, different stories, different ways of behaving. And right now, for a whole lot of reasons, and you heard a lot about those yesterday, business as usual will not be possible. So the question for me is, what is the systemic answer? And that brings me to a view which says, in fact, there are 3 pathways to the future. And I will be most interested to see how the Commission actually go. My view is that simply, due respect to one of the Commissioners, doing the same thing but with a piece of technology will not be sufficient. Yes, it's good. Yes, it does lower transaction costs, but no, it's not enough. And simply then taking what we do I'm about to upset another Commissioner, and calling it collaboration also won't be enough. But the question then is, if those 2 are not enough, just like doing manufacturing better in Geelong, where I come from, is not enough, then what is it we've got to do? So the colour of the future for the way that we go is purple. And I think that, in fact, the future of local government, the future that you must own, requires a new story. It's not a defensive story. You are like the Scots at Culloden. See how I'm pandering now to the chair. What happened at Culloden 1745 was the Scots massed as they had always done in their clans. And they charged the English. And then they were met by mass cannon. And only 15% of the men that were on that field walked away. And most of them then scattered, and my name is McAllum. I think you were the same. There's no point charging the future, because I think that the future is going to do to you, as that little symbol I've given you shows, a similar kind of thing. So what is your story? And I think that this requires totally different planning, a different kind of community, and the reality that the form and shape of our cities will change, and by the way, our countryside as well, will change dramatically. A quick example, a large services company that you all know by name, who have already announced some offshoring, within 2 years will only have 65% of their workforce working in centralised locations. 2 years. The rest of them will have to kind of work elsewhere. Smart cities, smart regions will be thinking about how they incorporate this new working diversity. That's just one, by the way, and they're very large. However, there's hope. And the hope is that all the technologies and all the case studies, providing you get the story right, are already here. You don't have to invent anything, but you do need a story. So let me help you with that, if I may. Very quickly, 200 years ago, we changed the nature of the form and shape of our cities and our countryside. And steam, which drove the tractors, of course, as well, and printing were the things that mattered. 100 years ago, that all changed, and local government, as we understand it, is based on this paradigm with suburban-based cities, oil and electricity and telephony and film running everything. But right now, just as we are with 3D printing, we're on the cusp of a totally different model. And we will see our society reframed into what I'm calling interconnected village ecologies, where things start to work together in different ways. And despite the fact that governments in this country seem to have no idea what they're doing in this space, renewables at the source of consumption will be the dominant technology. And if you want to see that, ask the Spaniards and the Germans and the Californians, because they're already there. And the social networking technologies change the nature of everything. And what this means is, and I want to drill down a moment to what this means for local government, is it's no good that the age of the machine is finished. The age of worrying about efficiency has gone. It's all about rethinking systems and distributed networks. And organisation form, by the way, changes, because the way you've currently got your organisations constructed is too expensive. Far too expensive. So, 50 years ago, that thing on the other side there, some of you might still look like that, is what organisations were like. Command and control still reigned. Fire services still do it. What we saw, I think, in the 90s and the early 2000s was the distributed, the decentralisation and the outsourcing model and the flattening of organisations. But in a distributed network world, it doesn't work like that anymore. You simply get things to cohere in the way that you need to. And in every sphere, I can show you organisations that are reframing in front of our eyes. And that's what's driving this large that's what's driving this large service organisation to change the nature and the way they work. This is a world, and this is important for people in the regional areas, no longer can you just do things and push them out, push services and push them out, create plans and push them out. This is a world where you're going to have to design everything from the demand side backwards. This is a huge revolution for our food producers. And the competitive model clearly changes to a collaborative model, but it's the collaboration of networks that are seamless. It's not some kind of round table conceived in King Arthur's days where everything is negotiated by lawyers. And the way that this is normally expressed, and you've heard a number of examples, is through the development of new ways of releasing value, what I call in my jargon business models. So what does this mean for local government? Well, in that blue system space I talked about before, we're going to see ecologies of services, some of which you will own, most of which you won't. You might own half of it, you might broker some of it, there'll be all kinds of things there. You will need to move to cloud-based systems, and the system will need to be owned by all of you collaboratively. Nobody will want to negotiate with you one-on-one. Clearly the place-based treasury model that, in fact, that you've seen, I think is a way that starts to express these kinds of networks. And we're going to start to see all kinds of 21st century infrastructures. So the question for local government here is, what is your view about these infrastructures? You could be in the electricity business again, because the current governments don't get it. But you could also be in the communications business through mesh technology, and some of you already are. And you're going to need intelligent roads. This is a world, in fact, which is called the Internet of Things. The infrastructure of the future will connect every business, every resident, every machine, and every vehicle in an intelligent communications, energy and logistics network. By the way, if you think this is really too radical, 100 years ago, people were walking up and saying, I can never see a world where everybody would have an electrical wire to their house. But that was the age of kings and emperors, so of course we can't change. And the other thing, of course, is the days of economies of scale mean nothing. Because in the network world, where transaction costs are almost nothing, it's about what's the right scope. My second point is, and this is the one that all of you who are elected officials, this is, remember that in that first slide, this is about competition and power and politics and policy and all of that good stuff. So this is about vast collaborations. And if you don't collaborate, it is simply, in the right way, it is simply too expensive. People will produce models around you that are vastly cheaper, and you will find people in the third sector, the social enterprises, delivering what you thought was your business. The notion of work that you and I have understood is being totally reframed. The 3D printing thing, remote working. By the way, not everybody can work from home. They will want spaces to collect and to be. This is an opportunity for rejuvenation. And things like the hub, which is at the other end of Melbourne, and there's one in Sydney, where all kinds of small enterprises come together at a very cheap rate to actually do their business, and then through interesting synergies, kind of like mini Silicon Valleys, learn how to collaborate. And that's exactly the kind of thing I'm working on with Penrith City right now as part of their rejuvenation strategy. And no one's going to be interested in owning anything anymore, especially Gen Y. By the way, for you baby boomers like me, you're far too young, Rebecca. For baby boomers like me, realise that within 2 years there'll be more Gen Ys in the workforce than there are us. The power has shifted. And this notion of crowdsourcing that I've heard about here before and crowdfunding will become the norm. That little building that you can see in front of you there is the B.D. Bacata building, which has just been built in Bogota in Colombia, which, as you know, is a very advanced part of the world. The people who will use that building, the hotels, the people who live in it, the offices, the retail, and all the rest of it, designed the building. And it was then funded through crowdfunding. This is a totally different model. And the key takeout here is, because politicians have no idea how to act in this world if they can't be collaborative, because they think they know best, is that the contractual age dies with the machine age. And the future is all about interpersonal relationships first, and then the contracts, not the other way around. I know some of you are still in the age of compulsory relationships, do it or I'll cut your head off, but seriously, you really are part of the failed state movement. The third piece that I think needs to be rethought, and I hope that this is useful to the panel, is that we're going to start to see, I think, this is the lens of community and built form and belonging and expression and arts, that in fact we're going to start, and by the way, planners of the world, get out of the way. You are terrible. You are committing crimes against humanity, in my view. Winston Churchill once said, we define our times by our buildings, but over time they define us. And if you look at some of the suburbs I travel through on my way home and those soulless shopping malls, I ask myself, what have we done? But there is news. There's a great move in the States where you can put high streets through the middle of it, you can open them up, you can bring people to live in them, and you turn the car parks back into wetlands. And this is all about starting to see in the built form multi-use, multi-expression, multi-ecologies. So things start to act with each other. Virtual old people's homes in some of the smaller rural towns rather than those dreadful monolithic things that look like a bygone age from the 1940s. People are going to prefer experiences, not transactions, use those, and all the institutions that you think of are all being rethought. And finally, this way of thinking and this way of doing things and all the case studies and all the technologies allow the use of far fewer resources to create more. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is a question of leadership. And I'm going to put some leadership attributes up here, which I don't think you've ever heard of, or some of you mightn't have. The first thing is, your leadership is going to be all about how you think about these networks, and how you create intelligence around them. The second aspect of authentic leadership in this world actually comes from having a sense of foresight, to actually saying I'm going to build the future, not protect the past. By the way, in the bicentennial, every speech looked backwards. What a disgrace. And then it's about the deep design for the future, using many of the models that we've heard about in the last few days, and then working out what the value is that you need to care about and look after and build for the future, which will have some remnants of the past in it. And finally, it's about bundling that all up and creating a sense of identity so other people know how to network with you. If you don't make yourself attractive to network with, the networks will go around you. For me, despite all the things I've said, I'm not interested in the noise and the blame. And we've got a fair bit of that on our horizons at the moment. In fact, if we didn't have that in our newspapers in the last few days, I wonder what they would have been talking about. What I'm arguing, ladies and gentlemen, the panel is, in fact, we need a new framework for conversation. And it needs to go above this solution or that solution. And the last time I looked, we haven't yet found a way to get rid of a whole lot of people humanely off the planet in some kind of spaceship. So we've actually got to bring you all with us. And, you know, the large, you know, retailers and everybody else. But if we don't do it, and if we don't do it at speed, and I'm talking about realising this world by 2020, then I think we're going to set and train a set of scenarios that future generations are going to hate us for. And that's not sufficient. So the quest for me in local government here is, have you got the leadership courage to be part of the solutions for the future? Or are you simply going to dance on the sidelines? Thank you very much indeed.
I really like that.
Good.
And I particularly liked it because I've been trailing around in my own world for a while, the slogan that, you know, what we are trying to do is to solve 21st century problems with 19th century legislative technology, which is more or less what you said. Two initial questions. You talked about leadership.
Yes.
It is kind of an inevitable, isn't it, that the last people to get with that kind of societal change will be the people most entrenched at the top of the legislative and policy-making tree. And I'm thinking in my own world, I'm thinking of permanent secretaries in Whitehall and people like that who actually control a lot of stuff. So what would your advice be to local government about how to lead in a world in which we have to lead people who traditionally we might have seen as being hierarchically above us in that 19th century model, point one. Point two, and I suspect that those of you from rural areas will recognise this. I mean, you know, I come from somewhere, you know, there's an old industrialised, very developed country, but in the neighbouring village to me, they just recently celebrated the 40th anniversary of the arrival of electricity in that village. And I see a lot of people, you know, we're about to move to a welfare system where everybody claims online. About 40% of people are not going to claim online. The Internet of Things, although you said the Internet of Things would be about every resident, every machine, there'll be quite a long period where it isn't, and there'll be people who will be the digitally excluded, is that the language?
Fine.
What's the mission of local government to the people who are going to be catching up in this world?
Okay, let me first come to the leadership question. In my view, it's actually about local government here owning the story. Last week I was in the Northern Territory. It's a very big place with 250,000 people. And lots of people have created stories for the Northern Territory, none of which they own. Things like the food bowl of the future, sorry, won't work. Not possible, not sustainable, not geologically possible. And I think, and what they're saying is we intend to be a 21st century network and distributed society and express that in our own way. Now, there are leaders, CEO of GE, the President of China, the Angela Merkel in Germany, City of Rome, province of Utrecht, San Antonio, Texas, who are absolutely designing their future on the basis that I have just talked about. In fact, that model I've just given you was affirmed by the EU as the basis for the future design of Europe in the Parliament in 2007 and was reaffirmed in 2012. So there is something there. But look, my view is that in fact all leaders like me go, I don't think business as usual is going to, the ones that really understand things are going, I can't make sense of the way that we're doing things anymore. The limits in the current system are becoming unbearable. And for those who've got enough foresight to see that, they will, I think, be persuaded by narratives that show, in fact, that through a much smarter use of resources, a radical reduction of transaction costs, and a networked approach, you can actually resolve these things. The second question was around the technology. In South Africa, they don't have, telephone lines to the villages or anything like that. They use this idea of mesh technology, which is where things can hop from one device to another. And already on iPhone, and I think it's coming to Android soon, there's an app that you can download where one phone can see the next phone, and that actually creates a base station, so things can hop just from one device to another. You don't actually need a telco. The telcos haven't quite woken up to it yet, but it's coming, and it will come very quickly. And so people are already using this kind of technology to boost gaps that are not there. So I've got, and by the way, I'm seeing the poorest people in the world using these technologies to change things. And I'm talking about people who pick coconuts in India. They're the ones who see these technologies as their pathway to the future. It's only a few spoiled people in the Western world that grizzle.
Grant, you. Thanks, Mike. Great stuff. Local government, I'm picking up the point that Paul made in his first comment. Local government finds itself within an existing government framework. So, taking all your points, what are the early transition steps for government? I mean, shaking off the past, generating a new story for the future, yes. But have you got in mind, from your work and experience, some early transition steps that government itself and units of government can make?
Yes, I have, and I think in those second or third slides I started to hint at what some of those were. And I think that the key thing is to actually start to, firstly to understand that form and shape is going to change. And if you understand that form and shape is going to change, then you need to start to build much more flexible, more dynamic models into your planning and regulatory systems. The second thing I think that comes with that shift in form and space, sorry, I've just lost the point, let me come back. The second thing I think is that we're shifting from an economic model of big things and big silos and big everything to a modular world. And this is a piece again that I don't think governments have quite got yet. So when you look at something like the future of Geelong, yes, it's in things like 3D printing, but the value chains and the ways that you do things are actually totally different. And the third thing I think is you release enormous power in your communities by deep engagement through crowdsourcing. Oh, by the way, as a byline, you know how Jeff Kennett yesterday was saying, get rid of your costs. Don't print anything unless somebody asks for it. So there's your printing budget gone straight away. Like, why? So those would be kind of three steps, I think, straight away. Form and shape, so you start to look at this multi-use, multi-interaction thing, modularised, and deep engagement through crowdsourcing.
Mike, one of the propositions that you've made was that people will prefer experiences rather than transactions, and really the drive for efficiency has been taking us very much in some of the conversations over the last couple of days have been around
how technology can benefit that, and e-gov and self-service and all of those sorts of things. So how do you actually balance the two?
Well, I think the first thing is all transactions will simply be a computer in a cupboard. So the future of local government in the transactional space will simply be a shared service, probably run through something that looks like the MAB as a computer in a cupboard. And there might be, you might have one person in the building to cater for those people that don't get those kinds of transactions that in effect act as a halfway point. What I think will start to happen is we will start to shift the nature of our communities because people will want an experience. So let me give you, for instance, I can see in many of the little towns around Melbourne, cafes opening that will have one table that will be a piece of a hyper interactive glass, and people will be able, Corning by the way have already done this, will be able to swipe things off their iPad onto this piece of glass and interact with it on that piece of glass with the people around them. That turns the kinds of conversations that we've had into an experience. That's a high-tech version, but there are lots of lower-tech experiences as well.
Now, I've been handed a piece of paper here that says Mike's time is up, which is very exciting for a futurologist, but I'm going to, in line with the new network world, I'm going to defy rules. And I think we should have at least 2 questions to Mike directly from the floor. So there's one over there, and one over there. Now, who's going to... John, can you take the microphone?
This is John's annual Get Fit program. So this is networking and collaboration, reducing transaction costs in action.
So the microphone got there first. Yep.
My experience is that information is pretty elitist. In my community, people really want access to the facts, to all the true facts. In communities you get half the facts, so how can you make a new story unless you know really all the true facts that are going on? And I think that's reflective of what's going on in the political situation today. The political conversation we're having today around education is because people don't have all the true facts. How are we going to get these?
Let's take both the questions at once. So, question over there, please.
Hi, Patrick McAllum from Wellington Shire Council in Victoria. I think it's a really good point you've made about interpersonal relationships versus contracts. I just wonder if you can comment on how, for example, if we were to expect one of our new employees to work with us on the basis of an interpersonal relationship rather than a contract, how the unions might come into play in your future world, as well as industrial relations and all these sort of things? Or will we end up with 2 classes of people, the entrepreneurs who are willing to take risks and the wage slaves?
Look, I agree. I'll take this one first because I'll come back to facts. My sense is that the great philosophies of the 20th century, whether I love them or not, so everything from communism, socialism, liberalism, fascism, have had their day and have gone. And in fact, most of them are, I would argue, reasonably well corrupted. By the way, as a political statement, I am neither left nor right, and I am against the centre. Because when you think about it, it means absolutely nothing. So I think what we're starting to see is, yes, we've got institutions that are there like that, but I think we're going to start to see people reframe work in different kinds of ways. So, again, if you can say to a person, let's design a working arrangement based on outcomes that actually will maximise the profits that you get for yourself. So, can we organise this so that you don't have to pay after-tax childcare, after-pay transport, da-di-da-di-da, because that costs you. And right now, the contract relationship never talks about those things. So it's broadening the conversation about saying, how can this individual work with this organisation whereby we can collectively add value to each other? And that takes you way, way beyond the current contract thing. And by the way, if you landed on that kind of arrangement with somebody and the unions decided to take it on, I would really like to see what would happen in the media. My guess is they wouldn't. And I'd make the point, I think that the case studies and technology is already here. Coming back to the woman over here, the notion around facts, it depends on whose facts, and it depends on whose definitions. And I think that most of the facts that we have relied on up until now in a networked world are in fact our greatest enemy. I think in fact that what we're starting to see in a networked world, by the way, I'm into intellectual rigour. Every line of everything I've got in there, I can show you the sources for it. But it's a different kind of way of thinking, it's a different way of doing things. So if I want facts around, say, future energy business models, I, in fact, go into a small group that I'm part of, 150 people globally, and say, who's got something on distributed energy business models? And I can assemble the best 12 reports in the world within a day. So it's a different way of thinking about how you collect information, how you process it. And by the way, there is one shire here who are using mesh technology to hook into the NBN and then distribute, is it Morrible or Cardinia or someone? Distribute to their libraries. And their libraries are packed with the poor, the powerless and the old, all using the fastest broadband in Victoria. So I have great hope. Thank you.